when one of the most famous men on the planet sat down at his mother's kitchen table on a quiet Saturday morning and found a faded envelope tucked between the pages of an old Bible, he had no idea that what was inside would unravel 14 years of silence. It was Saturday, January 11th, 2025. Orlando, Florida, 9:22 in the morning. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the specific sweetness of cinnamon rolls his mother had been making since before he could reach the counter. The window above the sink let in the pale January Florida light. A ceiling fan turned slowly. A gospel station played low from a small speaker on the refrigerator. The refrigerator that Lucille O'Neill, 70 years old, had been using in this kitchen for 11 years. The kitchen she had never asked for. The house her son had bought for her quietly, without ceremony, the way he did most things that mattered. Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds, sat sideways in a kitchen chair, because kitchen chairs and 7'1" men have never fully agreed on geometry. His knees cleared the table at an angle. His hands, wide enough to palm a basketball at age 14, wrapped around a coffee mug that looked like an espresso cup in his grip. He was not in a hurry. It was a Saturday. He had come to spend time with his mother, the way he tried to do on Saturdays when Orlando made it possible. Lucille had excused herself to the back of the house for something. She had left the Bible on the table. The Bible she had carried from Newark to Germany to Georgia to San Antonio to every version of home they had ever had. The Bible with the cracked spine and the soft cover and the photographs tucked between pages in the way his mother preserved things she loved. He reached for it without thinking, not to read it, just to touch it, the way you touch things that carry decades inside them. The envelope fell out. It landed on the blue tablecloth face down. He turned it over. His name was not on it. His mother's name was not on it. There was no return address, no postmark visible. Just a faded white envelope sealed at the flap and holding something that gave it just enough weight to mean something. He looked at it for 3 seconds. He opened it. Inside were 2 things: a folded slip of paper and a receipt. The receipt was from Orange County Property Management, dated January 7, 2011. It was a rent payment confirmation. The address on it was Lucille O'Neill's previous address, the apartment she had lived in before this house. The amount was $920. The name of the payer was not Lucille O'Neill. It was a name he had never seen before: Rosetta Mae Caldwell. He unfolded the paper. It was Lucille's handwriting. Short, 10 words. She paid. She's been paying. I don't know how to stop her. Shaquille O'Neal sat completely still in his mother's kitchen, with the ceiling fan turning slowly above him, and the gospel music playing low from the refrigerator, and the January Florida light coming through the window, and he did not move for 11 full seconds. Then he called his mother's name. Stay with us through this entire video, because what Shaq discovers about Rosetta Mae Caldwell in the next 48 hours will reach back 14 years and rearrange everything you think you know about what was quietly holding his mother up while the world was watching him become what he became. There is a building in this story. There is a woman who told no one. There is a ledger that was never meant to be found. And when the final piece connects, when you understand exactly who Rosetta Mae Caldwell is and why she did what she did, it will hit you somewhere you were not expecting. But first, you have to understand where his mother had been. To understand what this envelope meant, you have to go back. You have to go back past the 4 NBA championships and the finals MVP trophies and the business empire and the doctorate from Barry University and the arenas that shook when he walked in. Past the Los Angeles Lakers and the Miami Heat and the Orlando Magic and LSU. Past the shoe contracts and the commercials and the billions. Past all of it. You have to go back to Newark, New Jersey, 1979. Lucille O'Neill is 24 years old, and she is raising a child alone. Not because she is weak, because she is the kind of woman who handles what needs handling without requiring an audience for it. She works. She moves when the army requires it. She feeds her son on a budget that requires creativity and dignity in equal measure. She tells him, more than once, in the kitchen of whatever apartment they are in at the time, "You are not too much. The world is just still catching up to you." She means it about his size. She means it about everything. Sergeant Philip Harrison comes into their lives in San Antonio. He is a military man with a military man's precision and a military man's love of order and a military man's way of saying important things directly. He says to the boy more than once, "Being big means nothing if you don't stand for something." He means basketball. He means everything else too. The money was not always there. This is not the version of the story that makes it into the documentaries because it is not the part that produces highlights. But before the shoe contracts and before the arenas, there were apartments where the heat went out and months where the math did not work, and a mother who solved that math without telling her son how difficult the equation was. Lucille O'Neill was a woman who protected her children from the exact dimensions of her struggle. She gave them the outcome without showing them the work. She moved to Orlando after Shaq signed with the Magic. The proximity mattered to her. She found an apartment on the north side of the city, a reasonable unit in a building called Westridge Terrace on Lakeland Avenue, 2 bedrooms, carpeted floors, a parking space included. The rent was $920 per month. Shaq had offered more than once to cover it. She had declined more than once the way she declined things she felt she could handle herself. She had a job. She had income. She was fine. What she did not say was that fine covered the rent, but not always the gap between rent and everything else. Fine was a tightrope, a thin one, the kind you walk slowly. And sometime in early 2011, on the 1st of the month, a check arrived at the Orange County Property Management Office. It was for $920. The name on the check was Rosetta Mae Caldwell. The property manager, a man named Douglas Ferris, 41 years old, processed the payment without questioning it. He had received third-party payments before. It was not unusual. He filed the receipt and moved on. He received another one on the 1st of the following month, and the month after that. For 14 years, Shaquille O'Neal sat in his mother's kitchen with the January light coming through the window and the receipt in his hand, and said, simply, "Mama, who is Rosetta Caldwell?" Lucille O'Neal appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the receipt in his hand. She looked at her son. She pressed her lips together in the specific way she pressed them when she was deciding how to say something she had been not saying for a long time. "Come sit down," she said. He was already sitting. She sat across from him. She folded her hands on the blue tablecloth. She said, "She lived in the building." Lucille told it the way she told most important things, carefully, with the specific economy of a woman who has spent 70 years choosing which words to spend energy on. Rosetta Mae Caldwell had moved into Westridge Terrace on Lakeland Avenue in 2009, Unit 14, ground floor. 2 bedrooms, same layout as Lucille's. She was 63 years old at the time. She had a daughter in Memphis who called on Sundays. She had a cat named Perkins who did not care about anything except the sunny spot on the couch at 2 in the afternoon. She had been a school cafeteria worker for the Duval County School District for 27 years before her back gave out, and she retired at 61 on a pension that was adequate and not much more. She and Lucille had met in the laundry room in the autumn of 2009. Lucille was moving a load from the washer to the dryer. Rosetta was folding a pile of towels that she folded with the same precision she had folded school linens for 27 years. They talked about the dryers, which ran hot on the left and not hot enough on the right. They talked about the parking situation. They talked about the morning light in the building's courtyard, which was quite good if you had the right apartment. By Christmas of 2009, they were having coffee on Tuesday mornings. Not every Tuesday, most Tuesdays. In Lucille's kitchen or in Rosetta's kitchen, depending on who had made the first pot. They talked about their children, about getting older, about what it meant to have raised people who had gone on to become themselves without you in the room. Rosetta knew who Lucille's son was. Of course she knew. The entire building knew. But she never made it into a thing. She did not ask for autographs. She did not bring it up. She treated Lucille the way she would have treated any woman she was having coffee with on a Tuesday morning, which was with the specific ordinary warmth of a person who believes that people are worth knowing for what they actually are. In January of 2011, Lucille was short. Not dramatically short, not a crisis, $60 short. Between the utilities and the prescription she had needed, and the cost of a plane ticket she had bought to fly to a family matter in Georgia, the $60 that should have covered the gap was not there. She had a plan for it. She had a call to make. It was going to be fine. Rosetta noticed something in Lucille's face on the Tuesday before the 1st of the month. Not worry exactly. The thing before worry, the particular composure of a person who is managing something they have not told anyone about. Rosetta did not ask what was wrong. She went home after coffee. She called Orange County Property Management. She paid Lucille's rent. She did not tell Lucille. Lucille found out the following month when she went to pay her own rent, and Douglas Ferris told her it had already been paid. She asked by whom. He told her the name. She went to Rosetta's apartment that afternoon. Rosetta opened the door. Lucille said, "You paid my rent." Rosetta said, "The dryers on the left run hot." Lucille stared at her. Rosetta said, "Come in. I made biscuits." They sat in Rosetta's kitchen with its sunny window and its folded towels, and Perkins the cat in his spot on the couch, and Lucille said she could not accept it. She would pay it back, every dollar. Rosetta said, "You won't." Lucille said, "Rosetta." Rosetta said, "You fed people in that building for 2 years before I arrived. You brought food to Douglas's family when his wife was sick. You babysat the Rivera children on the 3rd floor without being asked. You are a woman who feeds people. A woman who feeds people is doing God's work. Let someone do a little of God's work back." Lucille pressed her hand over her mouth. The kitchen was very quiet. She agreed not to mention it again. What she did not know, and would not discover until she found the old receipt tucked into the Bible 11 years later, was that Rosetta had never stopped. She had paid Lucille's rent for 168 consecutive months. Rosetta Mae Caldwell, working from a fixed pension of $1,140 per month, had been setting aside $920 of it every 30 days. What remained for herself was $220, for food, for her own utilities, for everything. She had done this by eating simply, by not replacing things that broke until they were completely irreparable, by asking her daughter in Memphis for nothing, by telling everyone she knew that she was fine, that she had everything she needed, that retirement was going beautifully, thank you. She had a cat and a sunny window and a woman she had coffee with on Tuesday mornings, and she had decided that that was enough, more than enough. She had decided that the $920 going to the property management office every month was the best possible use of the money she had, because it was going to a woman who had spent her entire life making sure other people had what they needed. And Rosetta Mae Caldwell believed, in the specific and unshakable way that some people believe things, that what you give in that direction comes back. Not to you necessarily, but back. Into the world, into the people you helped, into whatever they make. What she also did not know was that Lucille had moved out of Westridge Terrace in 2014, when Shaq had finally managed to convince his mother to allow him to buy her a house. A real house, with a garden and a garage and a kitchen with a window that caught the morning light. Lucille had agreed on the condition that it not be too large. It was not too large. It was exactly right, but by the time Lucille moved out, the habit had been formed. The account had been created. The arrangement with the property management company was on automatic transfer. And when Douglas Ferris called to say that the tenant in Unit 12, Lucille O'Neill, had moved out, Rosetta had paused for a moment and then asked if she could redirect the payment. She redirected it to a fund at the property management company for residents who were short on rent. A hardship fund. She never named it. She never took credit for it. She told Douglas it was anonymous and she preferred to keep it that way. Douglas, who had by then been processing Rosetta Mae Caldwell's payments for 3 years and understood the nature of what he was dealing with, said he would honor that. The payments continued for 10 more years to tenants Douglas selected based on need, people who were short, people who were 1 bad month from having nowhere to go. 41 people in 10 years, none of whom knew who was covering their shortfall. 41 people who received a letter saying their balance had been cleared by an anonymous community fund, and could they please pay forward when they were able. 37 of them did. Shaquille O'Neal sat in his mother's kitchen for a long time after she finished talking. The ceiling fan turned slowly. The gospel station played low. The January Florida light moved across the blue tablecloth. He said, "Where is she now?" Lucille folded her hands again. She said, "That's the thing." Rosetta Mae Caldwell, 79 years old, had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure in October of 2024. She had not told her daughter in Memphis until December. She had not told Douglas Ferris, who still processed her payments every month, even when processing them now required her daughter to help manage the account. She had not told anyone in her current building, a modest assisted living community called Sunridge Gardens on Orange Blossom Trail in Orlando, where she had moved in 2022 when the apartment in Westridge Terrace had become too much to manage alone. She was in room 14, ground floor. The same number as always. She had Perkins's food dish on the windowsill because Perkins had died in 2019, but she had kept the dish because she liked the specific way it caught the light in the afternoon. She was 79 years old. She was alone in the mornings and alone in the afternoons, and her daughter called on Sundays. And every first of the month, $920 left an account in her name and went to a hardship fund at Orange County Property Management, and Douglas Ferris processed it without question. Lucille said, "I found that receipt 2 weeks ago when I was sorting through old things. I put it in the Bible because I didn't know what else to do with it. I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how." Shaq looked at the receipt. He looked at his mother. "Does she know that we know?" he said. Lucille shook her head. "How long has she been at Sunridge Gardens?" he said. 3 years, Lucille said. "I found out 2 months ago. I should have gone. I meant to go." There was a pause. The ceiling fan turned. "I'll go," he said. He called Kevin Okafor, his operations director, from the car outside his mother's house at 11:43 in the morning. Kevin was 43 years old, methodical and fast, the kind of professional who understood that certain calls required certain things to happen before he could explain why he was making them. He had worked for Shaq for 12 years. He had learned that the calls from outside Lucille's house on Saturday mornings were the ones that mattered. Shaq said, "I need everything you can find on a woman named Rosetta Mae Caldwell. She's 79. She's at Sunridge Gardens on Orange Blossom Trail. And I need to know what she's given to a hardship fund through a company called Orange County Property Management. All of it. Numbers, dates, everything." Kevin said he would have something by morning. He had it by 3 in the afternoon. The numbers were as follows. Between January 2011 and January 2025, Rosetta Mae Caldwell had transferred a total of $155,520 to 2 destinations, Lucille O'Neill's rent account for the first 36 months and the Orange County Property Management Resident Hardship Fund for the remaining 132 months. Her total pension income over that same period, based on the Duval County retirement schedule Kevin had obtained through a public records request, was approximately $249,000. She had given 62% of everything she had received in 14 years to other people. She had kept 38% for herself. Shaquille O'Neal sat in his car in his mother's driveway and read Kevin's email on his phone. He read it twice. Then he put the phone face down on the passenger seat. He pressed both enormous hands flat on the steering wheel. He looked through the windshield at the January Florida sky. He sat that way for 7 minutes. Then he drove to Sunridge Gardens. Sunridge Gardens on Orange Blossom Trail was a 2-story assisted living facility built in 1998, repainted twice since then, most recently in a shade of pale yellow that the brochure called warm sand. The parking lot had recently been resurfaced. There was a garden along the south side of the building with raised beds and a small fountain that was running. The lobby smelled like fresh coffee and something floral from a diffuser near the reception desk. The light inside was warm and artificial in the specific way of places that have learned how important consistent lighting is to the people who live in them. The woman at the front desk was named Carla, 34, wearing dark scrubs, and she recognized him immediately in the way that everyone recognizes him, which is with a brief physical recalibration followed by the professional decision to treat the situation normally. He told her he was there to visit a resident named Rosetta Caldwell. Carla said she would call the room to let Miss Caldwell know she had a visitor. He waited in the lobby. The fountain outside made a small, steady sound through the glass. Carla came back. She said Miss Caldwell had asked who was visiting. He told her to tell Miss Caldwell it was a friend of Lucille's. He heard the pause on the other end of the phone through the receiver Carla held. Then Carla said, "She says to come on back." Room 14 was at the end of the ground floor corridor. The hallway was carpeted in a neutral color, and the doors on either side were painted the same warm cream. He passed a room where a television was on. He passed a room where a woman was laughing on a phone call. He reached room 14. He knocked. There was a pause. Then a voice from inside. Older, clear, with the specific quality of a voice that has been deliberate and unhurried for a long time. "Come in." Rosetta Mae Caldwell was 5 feet 3 inches tall and 79 years old, and she was sitting in a high-backed chair beside the window, where the afternoon light came in at the angle it had been coming in at since she had selected this room specifically for that reason. She wore a pale green house dress with small white buttons. Her hair was white and cropped close. Her hands were folded in her lap. They were the hands of a woman who had folded things carefully for 79 years. Her eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses that were newer than they appeared, were dark and steady and completely calm. She looked at him. He stood in the doorway of room 14 at Sunridge Gardens and looked at her. He was 7 feet 1 inch tall, and the doorframe gave him approximately 3 inches of clearance, and he stood in it with the specific contained stillness of a man who is holding something very large in a very small space and is being careful not to disturb anything. He said, "Miss Caldwell, you're bigger than you are on television." He made a sound that was almost a laugh and was something else too. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat in it. His knees were close to her food tray. He adjusted. She watched him adjust with the patience of a woman who had watched large and complicated things find their arrangement her entire life. There was a window. There was the afternoon light. There was a food dish on the windowsill that did not have a cat in it. There was a framed photograph on the small dresser of a younger woman and a child and a man she did not introduce. There was a Bible on the nightstand with a blue bookmark. Shaq looked at the food dish. He said, "Was his name Perkins?" Rosetta Mae Caldwell looked at the food dish. She said very quietly, "Your mother told you about Perkins." He said, "She told me about Tuesday mornings too." She was still. She looked at her folded hands. She said, "She wasn't supposed to keep that receipt." He said, "She keeps everything that matters." Rosetta looked at the food dish again, at the light catching its rim. She said, "I don't need anything from you." He said, "I know that. That's not why I'm here." She said, "Then why are you here?" He leaned forward, both enormous forearms on his knees, his hands folded together, wide enough to hold everything she had ever given away. He said, "Because you gave 62% of everything you had for 14 years to people you were not required to help. You gave my mother 3 years of rent when she needed it, and you never let her make it into a debt. And then when she moved into the house I gave her, you redirected the money to 41 strangers who needed it, and you are still doing it, today, from this room, and you have not told your daughter, and you have not told anyone, and I am here because I needed to look at the person who did that and say thank you. That is the only reason I am here." Rosetta Mae Caldwell looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light moved slowly across the room. She said, "How much do you know?" He said, "All of it." She pressed her lips together. She looked at the window. She said, "Your mother used to say that a woman who feeds people is doing God's work." I heard her say it once to a woman in the laundry room who was embarrassed to have forgotten her quarters, and Lucille had given her coins from her own pocket. And the woman started to say she didn't need charity, and your mother said, "Don't call it charity. A woman who feeds people is doing God's work. Call it that instead." She paused. "I thought about that a lot. I had more quarters than your mother that year, so I fed people, with quarters, or the equivalent." He pressed both hands flat over his eyes. He stayed that way for 5 seconds. Then he moved his hands. He said, "I want to talk about what you need." She said, "I need the light to keep coming through that window at 3 in the afternoon. Everything else I have." He said, "Your heart." She was still. He said, "Kevin found the medical record summary. I'm not supposed to have it. I don't care. You were diagnosed in October. You're managing it with medication. The medication has a copay that is eating into the $220 a month you keep for yourself. You've missed 2 doses since November because of it." She did not say anything. The room was very quiet. He said, "I want to cover the medication, not as a debt, not as charity, as a woman who feeds people deserving to be fed in return. That is the entire transaction, nothing more." She looked at her hands. She said, "Lucille raised you right." He said, "She did." She looked at the food dish. She said very quietly, "His spot in the morning was that chair, where you're sitting now." He looked down at the chair. He said, "Good spot." She smiled. "Small. The real one." He stayed for an hour and 40 minutes. They talked about the laundry room in 2009, about the dryers on the left that ran hot, about Tuesday mornings and what biscuits she made, and what coffee Lucille always brought, about Perkins, who had been found as a kitten in a parking lot in Jacksonville and had been opinionated and specific and had loved exactly 3 things: the sunny spot on the couch, tuna from the can, and Rosetta's left shoulder. About her daughter in Memphis, whose name was Patricia, who called on Sundays and who did not know about the payments, and who was, Rosetta said carefully, not someone who needed to be told every decision her mother made. About Douglas Ferris, who had been processing her payments for 14 years and who had never once asked why. About 41 people who had received letters saying their shortfall had been covered by an anonymous community fund, and could they please pay forward when they were able. 37 of them had. Shaq asked what paying forward had looked like. Rosetta said she had asked Douglas to track it loosely, not formally, just to notice. He had told her last spring that of the 37 who had paid forward, he had identified 17 instances where a resident had directly cited the anonymous fund as their reason for helping another resident in a crisis. 17 people who had been helped going on to help others, who had then in some cases helped others again. Shaq looked at the food dish on the windowsill. He said, "The quarters." She said, "The quarters." Kevin Okafor received a call at 6:47 in the evening on Saturday, January 11, 2025. He was at home. He answered on the second ring. Shaq said, "I need 3 things done by Monday morning. First, full coverage on all of her cardiac medication, indefinitely, through the foundation. Set it up as a recurring medical support account in her name. No fanfare. Direct billing. Second, I want to meet with Douglas Ferris at Orange County Property Management this week. The hardship fund she's been feeding for 10 years needs to be formalized. It needs an endowment. I want to calculate what the fund would need to continue at its current level for 20 years, and I want that number by Monday. Third, her daughter in Memphis, Patricia Caldwell. I want to reach her directly, not to tell her the money stuff. That's Rosetta's to tell if she chooses, but to tell her that her mother is someone she should be calling more than Sundays." Kevin was quiet for a moment. He said, "Do you want me to explain to Patricia why you're calling?" Shaq said, "Tell her the truth. Tell her that her mother has been quietly holding up other people for 14 years, and that she deserves someone holding her up in return, and that someone should be her daughter." Kevin said he would handle it. Douglas Ferris, 55 years old, had worked for Orange County Property Management since 2002. He was a methodical man, with a methodical man's specific virtues, which included being extremely good at his job and extremely discreet about the parts of his job that required discretion. He had been processing Rosetta Mae Caldwell's payments for 14 years without commenting on them because she had asked him not to, and because he was the kind of man who honored what he was asked to honor. He met Shaq on Tuesday morning, January 14, 2025, at the Orange County Property Management office on Goldenrod Road in East Orlando. The office smelled like printer toner, and the coffee someone had brought in a travel mug. The carpet was the specific gray of offices that have had the same carpet for 12 years. Douglas was 5 feet 8 and wore a blue blazer over a checked shirt, and he did not seem overwhelmed by the fact of Shaquille O'Neal in his office, which Shaq noted and appreciated. He had the file ready, 14 years of records, every transaction, every recipient of the hardship fund payments, every letter sent, every acknowledgement received. He had organized it chronologically in a 3-ring binder with tabs because he was a methodical man, and the binder was how he honored the thing he had been asked to honor. Shaq looked at the binder. He looked at 14 years of $920 monthly entries, each one representing a fixed pension and a specific decision and a Tuesday morning in a laundry room in 2009. He said, "I want to endow this fund permanently." Douglas nodded. He had calculated the number overnight. At the current payment rate, a fully endowed fund generating returns at a conservative rate would require an initial contribution of $230,000. Shaq said, "Do it," he said, "and I want it named, not after me. Not after my foundation, after her." Douglas said, "What do you want to call it?" Shaq said, "The Rosetta Mae Caldwell Resident Support Fund." Douglas wrote it down. He wrote it down in the specific, deliberate way of a man who has been waiting 14 years for this thing to have a name. Patricia Caldwell, 44 years old, received a call on Wednesday, January 15, 2025, from a number she did not recognize. She answered because she was, like her mother, the kind of person who answered. Kevin explained who he was. He explained why he was calling in the way Shaq had instructed, which was with the truth. All of it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She never told me." Kevin said, "She wouldn't." Patricia said, "She had $220 a month, For herself. Kevin said, yes. Patricia said, she called me every Sunday, and she sounded completely fine. Kevin said, I think she was fine. I think she had decided what the $220 was enough for, and it was enough for what she needed. But there are things she needs that the $220 doesn't fully cover, and we'd like to help with those. And we thought you should know. Patricia was quiet again. She said, when can I come? She drove from Memphis to Orlando on Friday, January 17, 2025. She arrived at Sunridge Gardens at 4 in the afternoon. She went directly to room 14. Rosetta was in her chair by the window. The afternoon light was doing what it did at 4 o'clock. Perkins's food dish was on the windowsill. Patricia stood in the doorway. She looked at her mother. She said, Mama. Rosetta looked at her daughter. She said, you talked to that man. Patricia said, you fed strangers for 14 years on $220 a month. Rosetta looked at the food dish. She said, I had what I needed. Patricia pressed her hand over her mouth. She crossed the room. She sat on the edge of her mother's bed, and she held her mother's hands in her own, and she did not say anything for a while. Outside the window, the January Orlando afternoon was doing what January afternoons do in Florida, which is be warm enough to be confusing and quiet enough to let the important things happen. Patricia said, I should have been calling more than Sundays. Rosetta said, Sundays were enough. Patricia said, they weren't. Rosetta looked at her daughter's hands holding her own. She said, they were what I had, same as everything else. You use what you have, you make it enough, that's all there is to it. The Rosetta Mae Caldwell Resident Support Fund was formally established on February 3, 2025. The endowment was funded through the Shaquille O'Neal Foundation's Community Housing Initiative. The fund was designed to provide ongoing rent assistance to residents of Orange County properties experiencing short-term financial hardship. Douglas Ferris was named its administrator. He accepted without hesitation, in the specific way of a man who had been doing the job without the title for 14 years. The fund announcement was made quietly. A press release went to 3 local Orlando outlets. It mentioned the endowment. It mentioned the purpose. It mentioned that the fund was named in honor of a retired school cafeteria worker who had spent 14 years supporting her neighbors. It did not mention how large the contributions had been or where the endowment money had come from. The Orlando Sentinel ran a 4-paragraph piece on page B7. A local radio station read it on the morning news. 48 people shared the radio station's post on social media. One of them was Douglas Ferris, who had never posted anything about his work in 23 years, and who typed 3 words as his caption. 14 years, finally. The Shaq account shared the Sentinel article, not with commentary, just with the link. Within 6 hours, the article had been read 412,000 times. By midnight, it was over 2 million. By the following morning, the comments section was a document of human recognition. People writing about their own Rosettas, their own laundry room conversations, their own Tuesday mornings, their own versions of $920 going somewhere quieter than it was supposed to go. Someone in the comments wrote, she kept $220 for herself and gave everything else away for 14 years and called her daughter on Sundays and said she was fine. That is the most extraordinary thing I have ever read. Shaq read the comments from his phone in his kitchen in Orlando on Sunday morning, January 19, 2025. He read them for a long time, then he put the phone down and finished his coffee. He drove to Sunridge Gardens that afternoon. He had not called ahead. He brought coffee from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail, the good kind, because it was Sunridge and it was Sunday and Rosetta's daughter was there. Patricia answered the door of room 14 when he knocked. She was taller than her mother and had her mother's steady eyes, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who had been expecting this visit without being told it was coming. She said, she's awake. She had a good morning. He came in. Rosetta was in her chair. The light was doing the Sunday version of itself, which was softer and longer than the weekday version. She looked at the coffee. She said, that's from the diner. He said, you know the diner. She said, it's on Orange Blossom Trail. I walk there when I'm feeling well. He said, it's the good kind. She said, I know. Patricia poured 3 cups, and they sat in the small room with its Sunday light and its food dish on the windowsill and its framed photograph and the Bible with the blue bookmark, and the 3 of them drank coffee without hurrying. Rosetta said, I read the comments. He said, so did I. She said, one person said I was extraordinary. He said, several people said that. She looked at the food dish. She said, "I was just using what I had. That's not extraordinary. That's just math." He thought about that. He thought about his mother in the laundry room in 2009 with her coins. About a woman who had more coins that year doing the math. About $920 a month for 168 months. About 41 letters saying your balance has been cleared and please pay forward when you are able. About 37 people who had. He thought about the quarters. He looked at Rosetta. He said, "My stepfather used to tell me that being big means nothing if you don't stand for something." He meant it about basketball. He meant it about everything. What he was really saying was, you have more than other people. Use it, not for applause. Use it because it needs using. Rosetta listened. He said, "You had a pension and a cat, and Tuesday mornings, and you used all of it, for 14 years, without applause." That is the exact thing he was talking about. Not the size of the man, the size of the decision. The room was very quiet. Patricia looked at her coffee. Rosetta looked at the food dish on the windowsill. She said very quietly, "He sounds like a good man, your father." He said, "He was." She said, "Most of the good ones are quietly good. They don't make a production of it. They just do the thing." He said, "You're going to be in this story for a long time." She said, "I'd prefer to be in this room for a long time." He laughed, the big laugh, the room-filling one. In the small room at Sunridge Gardens, it filled all the available space and bounced off the pale yellow walls and startled Patricia into laughing too and made Rosetta smile, the real smile, the one that reached her eyes for the first time since he had arrived. By March of 2025, the Rosetta Mae Caldwell Resident Support Fund had received 53 additional donations from members of the public who had read the Sentinel article or seen the social media activity. The total was $31,440 in additional contributions. Douglas Ferris processed them all with the same methodical care he had applied to 14 years of $920 monthly entries. He called Shaq on March 15, 2025, to give him the update. He said, "I want you to know that of the 41 people the original fund helped, we have now heard back from 39 of them. The other 2 have moved out of the county, but a forwarding address tells me they are both in stable housing situations," Shaq said. "And the 37 who paid forward," Douglas said. "We've now tracked 22 direct downstream instances, meaning people who were helped by someone who was helped by someone who was helped by the fund." Shaq was quiet. He said, "The quarters," Douglas said. "Excuse me," Shaq said. "Nothing, thank you, Douglas." Patricia Caldwell began driving from Memphis to Orlando on the first weekend of every month. She stayed until Monday. She and her mother had coffee on Saturday mornings, which became the new Tuesday morning, which became the thing. Rosetta did not tell Patricia to come more often. Patricia came more often anyway, which is the version of that sentence that matters. Rosetta's cardiac medication was covered in full through the Foundation's medical support account. Her copays were zero. She did not miss any more doses. Her cardiologist, a woman named Dr. Amara Osei-Bonsu at Orlando Health, reported in April that her condition was stable and that consistent medication access had made a significant measurable difference. Rosetta told Shaq this on a Sunday in May when he came by with coffee from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail. She said, "The doctor says I'm stable." He said, "I heard." She said, "You talked to my doctor." He said, "Dr. Osei-Bonsu's office sends the Foundation a monthly summary. You signed the release in February." She looked at him. She said, "I did sign something." He said, "I'm aware." She said, "You're very thorough." He said, "I had a good stepfather." She smiled the real smile again. In July of 2025, Shaq sat in the garden at Sunridge Gardens with Rosetta on a Tuesday afternoon. They had moved outside because July in Orlando and the specific quality of July afternoon shade had persuaded them. A small table, 2 chairs. The fountain was running. The raised beds along the south wall had tomatoes in them that someone on the staff had planted in April and were doing extremely well. Rosetta looked at the tomatoes. She said, "Patricia is thinking about moving to Orlando." He said, "What do you think about that?" She said, "I think it would mean more than Sundays." He said, "Is that what you want?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "A woman who feeds people doesn't like to say what she wants. It's a professional hazard." He laughed. The big laugh. The fountain kept running. She said, "Yes, it's what I want." Patricia Caldwell moved to Orlando in September of 2025. She found a job with the Orange County Public School System as a curriculum coordinator. She rented an apartment 4 miles from Sunridge Gardens. She came for coffee on Tuesday mornings and Sunday afternoons, and some Thursdays in between. Douglas Ferris sent the fund's annual report to the foundation in October of 2025. The fund had assisted 62 households in its first calendar year of formal operation. 38 of those households had already paid something forward, in amounts ranging from $11 to several hundred, through a mechanism Douglas had established for voluntary contributions. He called it the forward account. He had named it himself, quietly, without asking permission, which was the kind of man he was. Shaq received the report on a Thursday morning in Orlando. He read it at his kitchen table with his coffee. The ceiling fan turned slowly. The October Florida light came through the kitchen window at the specific angle it came through in October, which was different from January, cooler, less flat, more angled. He thought about the laundry room in 2009. He had not been there. He had not known about it. His mother had not told him, because his mother was the kind of person who handled things, and the laundry room in 2009 had been a handled thing. A thing that had happened, and resolved, and continued. He thought about 14 years of $920 months. About $220 for food and utilities and everything else. About Tuesday mornings with biscuits and coffee. About a food dish on a windowsill catching the afternoon light. He thought about what his mother had said in her kitchen in January with the blue tablecloth and the ceiling fan and the gospel station playing low. She pays. She's been paying. I don't know how to stop her. He thought, you don't stop her. You meet her where she is and you say thank you, and you cover the medication, and you name the fund, and you send coffee from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail. You make sure her daughter is driving down on Tuesdays. You make sure the quarterly is 62 households and 38 paying forward. You make sure the math keeps working, in the direction she started it going, for as long as there is someone who needs it. He put the report down. He picked up his phone. He called Rosetta. She answered on the third ring. She said, I was wondering when you'd call about that report. He said, 62 households. She said, Douglas told me. He said, 38 paid forward. She said, that sounds about right. People are generally good when you give them the chance. He said, I want to ask you something. She said, ask. He said, why the laundry room? You could have let that moment pass. Most people would have let that moment pass. There was a pause. She said, I had quarters. He waited. She said, I had quarters, and your mother had given hers away, and I had enough. That's all it was. It was not profound. It was not a decision I labored over. It was math. You see someone who is short, and you have enough to cover the difference, and you cover it. The laundry room is just where the math happened to present itself. He was quiet. She said, your mother called it God's work. I think it's just arithmetic. The profound part is just that most people don't trust the arithmetic. They think there won't be enough left for them. But there always is. There's always enough left. You just have to do the addition honestly. He pressed his hand flat on the kitchen table. He looked at the October Florida light coming through the window at its October angle. He said, my mother was right about you. She said, what did she say? He said, she said, she's the one who taught me I was doing God's work. There was a long pause. The line was very quiet. Rosetta said very quietly, tell her the laundry was her idea. I was just the quarters. Shaq smiled. He did not say anything for a moment. He said, I'll tell her. She said, good. Now I have coffee getting cold. He said, Patricia's there? She said, Tuesday morning. He said, I'll let you go. She said, come by Sunday. He said, I'll bring the good kind. She said, I know you will. Outside Sunridge Gardens on Orange Blossom Trail in Orlando, Florida, in the October of 2025, the fountain in the garden runs. The tomatoes in the raised beds along the south wall have finished their season. Someone on the staff has already turned the soil for whatever comes next. The afternoon light comes through the window of room 14 at the angle it always comes, the angle Rosetta selected this room for, the angle that catches the rim of Perkins's food dish and makes it glow for 20 minutes every afternoon. Inside room 14, a woman is having coffee with her daughter on a Tuesday morning. The coffee is from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail. The cups are ordinary. The light is good. The math is working. And in a property management office on Goldenrod Road in East Orlando, A methodical man named Douglas Ferris is processing the first-of-the-month transfers into the Rosetta Mae Caldwell Resident Support Fund. He does it the same way he has always done it, carefully, without comment. With the specific quiet satisfaction of a man who has been honoring something important for 14 years and is still honoring it now, because someone decided in a laundry room in 2009 that the quarters were enough. Because somewhere out there right now, there is a woman who has more quarters than the person next to her. Not many more. Maybe just a few. Maybe just enough to cover the difference between that person making it through the month and not making it through the month. And she is standing in a laundry room, or a checkout line, or an elevator, and she is seeing the math, and she is deciding whether the arithmetic is trustworthy, whether there will be enough left for her. There will be. There always is. You just have to do the addition honestly. Because that is what Rosetta Mae Caldwell did. Not once, not dramatically, not for applause. 168 times, $920, for 14 years, from a pension of $1,140 a month. She did the math, and she trusted it, and she let it run. And 41 people got letters, and 37 paid forward, and 22 downstream instances became 38. And a fund that was never meant to exist now has a name and an endowment, and a methodical man who processes the transfers on the first of every month, with a specific quiet satisfaction. And in a room in an assisted living facility on Orange Blossom Trail, a woman has coffee with her daughter on Tuesday mornings, and listens to the fountain in the garden, and watches the afternoon light come through the window at the angle she selected this room for, and trusts the arithmetic. That is the whole story. That is what it looks like when you use what you have. That is the laundry room math. That is the quarters. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. From Orlando, from Memphis, from Newark, from any city where someone once covered the difference for you without making it into a debt. We read every single one of them, every comment, and we love knowing where this community reaches. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own laundry room, your own Tuesday morning, your own moment where you had enough quarters to cover someone's difference, please hit that like button right now. 1 second, 1 tap. It helps this story reach someone tonight who needs to hear that the arithmetic is trustworthy, that there will be enough left, that the math works. And if you are new here, welcome. Subscribe and join a community that believes in the Tuesday morning kind of kindness, the laundry room kind, the kind that does not make a production of itself, the kind that just does the thing because the thing needs doing and the quarters are there. Share this video with one person today, just one. The one who has been quietly covering the difference for someone and has never told anyone. The one who deserves to hear that what they are doing is God's work. Because that is exactly how this kind of kindness travels. One person, one calculation, 1 month at a time. Now click on the video appearing on your screen right now because the next story is something you are absolutely not going to see coming. We will see you there. There is something about Douglas Ferris that does not fit into the numbers, but belongs in the story. He had been processing Rosetta's payments since January of 2011. In 14 years, he had seen the amount stay exactly the same, $920, every single month, regardless of inflation, regardless of what it cost him personally to send it. He had noticed this. He had filed it in the specific mental folder where he kept things that he did not know how to categorize, but did not want to forget. He had also noticed, over the 14 years, a pattern in the recipients of the hardship fund payments. They were not random. He had access to the applications. He saw who was struggling and why. He had begun, quietly and without instruction, to prioritize the applications in a specific way. Not by the size of the shortfall, by the situation. He gave priority to elderly residents on fixed incomes, to single parents with working but not sufficient incomes, to people who had never been late before and whose lateness was clearly situational rather than chronic. He did this because it was what Rosetta's money was for, or at least what he understood Rosetta's money to be for, even though she had never told him so directly. He had constructed his interpretation of her intent from 14 years of watching someone give most of what they had every month and ask for nothing in return. When Shaq came to his office on Tuesday morning in January and said the fund needed to be formalized and he wanted a number, Douglas already had the number. He had been running the informal projection in his head for 2 years, since the day he had done the math on how long the payments could continue given Rosetta's age and the trajectory of her health. He had been waiting for someone to make the call. When Shaq showed up in his office, 6 feet taller than the doorframe comfortably accommodated, Douglas Ferris had looked at him and thought, "There it is. That is who was going to make the call." He said this to Shaq over the phone in March, when they were discussing the fund's first formal quarterly report. He did not say it as a compliment. He said it the way he said most things, which was plainly. Shaq said, "You had been waiting." Douglas said, "I had been waiting for the right person to show up." Shaq said, "What made you think I was the right person?" Douglas said, "You came on a Saturday. You didn't send someone. You drove yourself. You sat in my office and you didn't make it about yourself at any point in the conversation. And you named the fund after her." Shaq was quiet. Douglas said, "The naming was the thing. That's when I knew." On a warm Wednesday morning in March of 2025, Lucille O'Neill drove to Sunridge Gardens on Orange Blossom Trail. She had asked Shaq not to tell Rosetta she was coming. He had honored that. She arrived at 9:45 in the morning with a basket that contained coffee from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail, because her son had told her it was the good kind, and her son was right about coffee. She also had biscuits she had made herself at 6 that morning, which she had not told anyone about. Carla at the front desk called room 14. There was a pause on the line. Then Carla said, "She says to come on back." Lucille O'Neill, 70 years old, walked down the carpeted corridor of Sunridge Gardens with a basket in her hands and the specific upright, unhurried pace of a woman who has always known where she was going. She knocked on the door of room 14. Rosetta said, "Come in." Lucille opened the door. The two women looked at each other across the small room with its afternoon light and its food dish on the windowsill and its framed photograph and the Bible with the blue bookmark. Rosetta said, "I thought it might be you." Lucille said, "You always did know." She set the basket on the table. She pulled out the coffee. She pulled out the biscuits. Rosetta said, "You made biscuits." Lucille said, "It's Tuesday." Rosetta Mae Caldwell looked at the biscuits. She looked at Lucille. She said, "You never told him all those years." Lucille said, "You asked me not to." Rosetta looked at the food dish. She said, "I thought you might have forgotten. 11 years is a long time." Lucille said, "A woman who feeds people doesn't forget who fed her." The room was very quiet. The fountain outside ran in the garden. The morning light was doing the Wednesday morning version of itself, which was clear and unhurried. Rosetta pressed both hands together in her lap. She looked at them. She looked at Lucille. She said, "I kept paying after you moved. I hope that was all right." Lucille said, "You were always doing God's work. I wasn't going to stop you." Rosetta smiled. The real one, the one that reached her eyes. She said, "Pour the coffee. These biscuits aren't going to eat themselves." Lucille poured 2 cups. They sat at the small table by the window. Tuesday morning. 14 years later. The same math. In the months that followed, the Rosetta Mae Caldwell Resident Support Fund received attention it had not sought. A woman named Josephine Tran, 62 years old, a retired teacher in Sacramento who had read the Sentinel article in January, wrote a piece for a regional nonprofit magazine about the structure of the fund and what it modeled for community support organizations. The piece was shared 23,000 times. 3 community foundations in different states contacted Douglas Ferris about replicating the model in their regions. Douglas forwarded the inquiries to Kevin Okafor. Kevin forwarded them to Shaq. Shaq read them on a Thursday morning in April. He sat with them for a long time. Then he called Kevin. He said, "I want to talk to Rosetta about this before we respond to anyone." He drove to Sunridge Gardens on Sunday, brought the coffee. Patricia was there. The 3 of them sat in the room with its afternoon light and its food dish, and he showed Rosetta the inquiries on his phone. She read them. She said, "People want to do this in other cities." He said, "Yes." She said, "Douglas's model." He said, "Your quarters, his model." She thought about it. She said, "Tell them the arithmetic is the whole thing. If they don't trust the arithmetic, the model won't work. The whole thing depends on someone deciding that there will be enough left. If they're starting from scarcity, they'll never get anywhere." He said, "Is that a yes?" She said, "That's instructions. Figure out the yes on your own." He laughed. The big one. By June of 2025, Douglas Ferris had conducted 3 calls with community organizations in other states who were implementing versions of the fund. He handled them the same way he handled everything, methodically, clearly, without drama. He said to Shaq during one of their monthly check-in calls, doing the best work of his career. Shaq said, "You've been doing this work for 14 years without calling it that." Douglas said, "I called it processing payments." Shaq said, "Same thing." Douglas was quiet for a moment. He said, "I suppose it is." Rosetta's health held steady through the spring and into the summer. The cardiac medication, consistently available and consistently taken, made the specific difference that Dr. Osebunsu had predicted it would make. The July report was stable. The August report was stable. Patricia came on Tuesdays and some Thursdays. On the 1st of September, Rosetta walked to the diner on Orange Blossom Trail for the first time since February and ordered coffee and sat by the window and watched the Orlando morning do what it did. She called Shaq when she got back. She said, "I walked to the diner." He said, "How was it?" She said, "The coffee was the good kind." He laughed. She said, "I sat by the window. A woman at the next table was short on her bill. The young man behind the counter covered it. He didn't make a thing of it. He just covered it." She paused. She said, "The arithmetic is trustworthy." He said, "I know." She said, "It always has been. People just need reminding." On a warm Saturday morning in October of 2025, Shaq sat in his mother's kitchen in Orlando. The October Florida light came through the window above the sink at the October angle, which was different from January, softer and more specific. The ceiling fan turned slowly. A gospel station played low from the small speaker on the refrigerator. Lucille was at the counter. She was making cinnamon rolls. He had a coffee mug in his hand. The mug was the one with the chip on the rim that she had been using since 1998 and refused to throw away. He had offered to replace it 4 times. 4 times she had said she did not want it replaced. Some things, she had explained, were not about their condition but about their history. He looked at the chip on the rim. He said, "She walked to the diner." Lucille turned from the counter. She said, "I know, she called me." He said, "She called you before she called me?" Lucille said, "It was Tuesday." He smiled. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon, and the specific sweetness of his mother's baking, and the coffee in the chipped mug, and the October Florida morning doing exactly what it was supposed to do. He thought about a laundry room in 2009, about quarters, about a woman who had trusted the arithmetic and let it run for 14 years and called it nothing special, just math. He thought about Douglas Ferris processing transfers on the 1st of every month with the specific quiet satisfaction of a man honoring something that finally had a name. He thought about 41 letters, 37 people paying forward, 22 downstream instances becoming 38, becoming whatever it would become next month and the month after that. He thought about his mother saying, "A woman who feeds people is doing God's work." He thought about Rosetta saying, "I think it's just arithmetic." He thought, "They are both right. The arithmetic is the work is the arithmetic. You use what you have, you trust there will be enough left, you do the addition honestly. And what you started in a laundry room in 2009 is still running 14 years later from a room on Orange Blossom Trail, with a food dish on the windowsill and a fountain in the garden, and a daughter who comes on Tuesdays." His mother set a plate on the table in front of him. One cinnamon roll, still warm, the frosting not quite set. She said, "Don't let it get cold." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She went back to the counter. He ate the cinnamon roll. Outside, the October Orlando morning continued doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The ceiling fan turned. The gospel station played low. The light came through the window at its October angle and fell across the blue tablecloth and the chipped coffee mug and the hands of a man who had driven to a facility on Orange Blossom Trail in January with a receipt in his pocket and said thank you and named a fund and covered the medication and made sure the arithmetic kept running. The arithmetic keeps running. It always does, when someone trusts it enough to start it. That is the whole story. A laundry room, a woman with quarters, 14 years, $920 a month, $220 for herself, 41 letters, 37 paid forward, a fund with a name, a daughter who comes on Tuesdays, a food dish on the windowsill catching the afternoon light, and the arithmetic still running. That is all. That is exactly enough. There is one more detail, small, but it belongs here. On the 1st of November 2025, the Rosetta Mae Caldwell Resident Support Fund processed its regular monthly transfers. Douglas Ferris did this from his desk on Goldenrod Road in East Orlando on the morning of November 1st, a Saturday, which was unusual, but which he had chosen to come in for because he preferred to begin each month's processing himself rather than leave it to the automated schedule. He was at his desk at 8:47 in the morning. The office was quiet on Saturday. The coffee maker in the small kitchen at the back had been set on a timer, and the specific smell of it had filled the space before he arrived. He poured a cup. He sat at his desk. He opened the fund's account summary. He saw a deposit that had not been there on October 31st. It was for $920. The name on the deposit was not Rosetta Mae Caldwell. It was from 37 different individuals, each contributing varying amounts, the total summing precisely to $920. He looked at the names. He recognized 11 of them from the fund's recipient history, people who had received the hardship fund assistance, people who had paid forward in smaller amounts over the preceding months, people who had found each other, somehow, and had decided to mark the anniversary of the fund's formal establishment with a collective payment in the exact amount Rosetta had sent every month for 14 years. Douglas Ferris sat at his desk in the empty office on the 1st of November, with his cup of coffee, and looked at the deposit. He looked at it for a long time. Then he called Shaq. Shaq answered on the second ring. Douglas said, "I need you to look at something." He sent the screenshot. Shaq looked at it. He counted the 37 names. He looked at the total. $920. He pressed his hand flat over his eyes. He stayed that way for 4 seconds. Then he moved his hand. He said, "Does she know?" Douglas said, "Not yet." Shaq said, "Let me tell her." He drove to Sunridge Gardens that morning. He had not called ahead. He brought coffee from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail. Patricia was there. It was the first Saturday of the month, and Patricia had driven down for the weekend. He showed them the screenshot on his phone, all 3 of them in the room with its November morning light and the food dish on the windowsill and the fountain running in the garden outside. Rosetta looked at the phone. She looked at the 37 names. She looked at the total. She was completely still for 8 seconds. Patricia reached over and put her hand on her mother's hand. Rosetta looked at the total one more time. She said, $920. Shaq said, "Yes." She handed the phone back. She looked at the food dish on the windowsill. She said, very quietly, "The arithmetic." Shaq said, "The arithmetic." She did not cry. She was not that kind of woman. But something happened in her face in those seconds. That was the face of a person watching something they started come back to them in a form they could not have predicted. Not the $920. That was just numbers. What came back was the fact of 37 people, each of whom had received something when they were short. Each of whom had paid it forward in whatever amount they had, finding each other in November and sending $920 to a fund named after her on the first day of the month. The arithmetic, running, forward. Like she had always trusted it would. Patricia said, "What do we do with it?" Rosetta looked at Douglas's open account on the phone screen. She said, "Process the transfer, 1st of the month, same as always." She looked at Shaq. She said, "Same as always." He said, "Same as always." Outside room 14 at Sunridge Gardens on Orange Blossom Trail, the November Florida morning was doing what November mornings do in Orlando, which is be mild and clear and a little more specific in its light than October. The fountain in the garden ran. The raised beds along the south wall held the turned soil from someone's October cleanup, ready for whatever would come in spring. Inside, a woman had coffee with her daughter, and a man who had driven over because 37 people had done the math. The coffee was from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail. The good kind, same as always. The ceiling fan in Lucille O'Neill's kitchen turned slowly on a November morning in Orlando, while her son sat at the blue tablecloth and finished his coffee. She was at the sink washing a cup. The gospel station played low from the refrigerator. The November light came through the window above the sink at the November angle, which was specific and good. He had told her about the 37 names and the $920. She had listened without interrupting. She had not said anything for a moment. Then she had said, "You see, that's what I mean. A woman who feeds people is doing God's work, and God's work pays forward." He looked at the chipped coffee mug on the table. He said, "Rosetta said it's just arithmetic." Lucille turned from the sink. She said, "Same thing." He smiled. She dried her hands on the dish towel that had been on that hook for 11 years. She looked at her son. She said, "You did good." He said, "She did it first." Lucille said, "Then you did good second. Second is still good." He looked at the window. He thought about the laundry room. He thought about quarters. He thought about Douglas Ferris on a Saturday morning processing a deposit from 37 names that summed to $920. He thought, the best things that happen do not announce themselves. They happen in laundry rooms. They happen in small rooms with food dishes on windowsills. They happen in kitchens with chipped coffee mugs and ceiling fans turning slowly. They happen in the math, in the monthly deposits, in the Tuesday mornings. They happen over time, quietly, in the direction of whoever is short. And that is the story of Rosetta Mae Caldwell, and the quarters, and the arithmetic, and the 14 years. That is the story of a woman who had enough to cover the difference, and covered it without asking if she should. That is the story of what happens when the math is trusted, and the numbers are run, and the first of the month comes, and the transfer goes through, and the letters say please pay forward when you are able. That is the story of 37 people who paid forward and then found each other and sent $920 on the 1st of November to a fund named after a woman in room 14 who keeps a cat's food dish on the windowsill because she likes the specific way it catches the light. That is all. That is the whole story. From a laundry room on Lakeland Avenue to a fund on Goldenrod Road to 37 names on a November deposit and a coffee from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail. Same as always, that is everything. Kevin Okafor presented the 6-month operational summary of the Rosetta Mae Caldwell Resident Support Fund at the Foundation's internal review in July of 2025. He had been with the Foundation for 12 years, and he had presented many operational summaries. He described this one differently. He said, "This fund has a specific quality that the others don't. The reciprocity rate. Of the people assisted, 62% have made a contribution back to the fund or to another resident within 6 months of receiving assistance. The benchmark for this kind of community fund is typically 12 to 18%. 62% is not a statistical outcome, it's a cultural one," Shaq said. "What do you mean cultural?" Kevin said. "It means the fund is behaving the way the person who started it behaved. The letters say please pay forward when you are able, but people are paying forward even when it's not easy for them to do so. That's not just compliance with the instruction. That's adoption of the underlying value. The fund has a character. It inherited the character of the person who started it." Shaq was quiet for a moment. He said, "The quarters." Kevin said, "Yes, exactly that." Josephine Tran, the retired teacher in Sacramento who had written about the fund in the nonprofit magazine, published a follow-up piece in August. It focused on the 62% reciprocity rate. It described the fund's structure, the letters Douglas sent, the forward account he had created. It described Rosetta's history, with her permission, in the specific terms she had approved. A retired school cafeteria worker in Orlando who had been supporting her neighbors from a fixed income for 14 years because she had decided the arithmetic was trustworthy. The piece was shared 41,000 times. 7 community organizations in 6 states contacted Douglas Ferris. Douglas handled all 7 calls with the same methodical clarity he brought to everything. He sent each of them a 1-page document he had created himself, titled simply, "How the Fund Works." It explained the letter structure, the forward account, the monthly review process, the anonymity protection for donors, and the selection criteria for recipients. At the bottom of the document, under a heading that said Foundation, was a single sentence. It read, "This fund exists because someone decided that the arithmetic was trustworthy. Build your fund from that same decision and it will work. Start from scarcity and it won't." He had not told anyone he was going to write that. When Shaq saw it in September, he called Douglas. He said, "The last sentence." Douglas said, "Is it too much?" Shaq said, "It's exactly right." Douglas said, "That's what she told you. I thought it should be in writing." Shaq said, "You know what you should do." Douglas said, "I think I do." He sent the 1-page document to Rosetta in October. He sent it as a physical letter because she was Rosetta Caldwell, and she was from the generation that honored physical letters. He included a short handwritten note that said, "This is what we're telling people. I thought you should see it. Thank you for starting something that has instructions." Rosetta read the letter on a Tuesday morning with her coffee from the diner. Patricia was there. She read the document. She read the last sentence. She put the document down. She said, "He put it in writing." Patricia said, "Was that all right?" She looked at the food dish on the windowsill. She said, "That's what it was always for." In the spring of 2026, the first replication of the fund model launched in a community in Memphis, Tennessee. The organization that established it was a neighborhood housing association that had been working with Douglas Ferris for 4 months. They named their fund the Neighbor Fund. They sent Rosetta a card explaining what they had done and thanking her for the model. She sent them back a postcard. It said, "Trust the arithmetic." It was signed Rosetta Caldwell. Underneath the signature, in smaller handwriting, she had added, "Tell them it's just math." The Neighborhood Housing Association in Memphis framed the postcard. It hung in their office above the desk where they processed applications. Rosetta did not know this until Patricia told her in June, having seen a photograph of the framed postcard posted on the organization's social media account. Patricia said, "They framed your postcard." Rosetta said, "The arithmetic one." Patricia said, "Yes." Rosetta looked at the food dish. She said, "Good spot for it." On a quiet evening in April of 2026, Lucille O'Neill sat in her kitchen in Orlando with a cup of tea. The ceiling fan turned slowly. The spring Florida evening was warm without being hot, the specific temperature that Florida reaches in April before it decides to commit to summer. The window above the sink was open slightly. From somewhere down the street, a lawnmower ran in the middle distance. A car passed with its radio on, something she didn't recognize. The gospel station was on low from the refrigerator. She was not doing anything in particular. She was thinking about the laundry room. She had not been in that laundry room since 2014, when she had moved into this house. She could not say with certainty what had happened to the dryers, whether the left ones still ran hot, or whether someone had finally fixed them. She thought probably they still ran hot. These things rarely got fixed. She thought about Rosetta folding towels with the precision of a woman who had folded school linens for 27 years. She thought about her own coins that she had given away before she had any left, and how she had intended to go back down to the laundry room without mentioning it again, and how Rosetta had beaten her to it. She thought, that is who she is. She is the one who beats you to it. She picked up her phone. She called Rosetta. Rosetta answered on the third ring. Lucille said, "It's Tuesday tomorrow." Rosetta said, "I know what day it is." Lucille said, "I thought I'd come and make biscuits." There was a pause. Rosetta said, "I have the coffee." Lucille said, "I know you do." Rosetta said, "Come at 9. Lucille said, "I'll be there at 9. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table with her tea. The ceiling fan turned. The lawnmower ran somewhere down the street. The spring Florida evening did what it did. Warm without commitment, particular without announcing it. She thought, some things started in laundry rooms run for 14 years and get named and endowed and replicated in Memphis and framed on walls in offices. And some things started in laundry rooms are just Tuesday mornings, just biscuits, just coffee at 9, just the arithmetic, running. She picked up her tea. She finished it. She went to bed. And in the morning she would make biscuits. Same as always. Same as it has always been. That is the story. That is all of it. That is exactly enough. Outside Sunridge Gardens on Orange Blossom Trail, the fountain runs. The raised beds are ready. The afternoon light reaches room 14 at the angle Rosetta selected it for. Perkins's food dish is on the windowsill. The arithmetic is running. It always will. Because somewhere out there right now, someone is short by $60. Not dramatically, not a crisis. Just $60 between making it and not making it this month. And somewhere close to them, someone has the $60 and is standing in the laundry room deciding whether the arithmetic is trustworthy, whether there will be enough left. There will be. There always is. You just have to do the addition honestly. You just have to trust that what you send in the direction of someone who needs it comes back. Not to you, not necessarily, but back. Into the world, into the people you helped, into what they make, into 37 names on a November deposit, into a fund named after you, into a postcard framed on a wall in Memphis, into biscuits made at 6 in the morning for a Tuesday visit, into coffee from the diner on Orange Blossom Trail, into the good kind, same as always. The arithmetic, running,